Hey everyone, ready to dive into something big. We're talking decentralization today. And I'm not just talking about the tech. This is about power, freedom, like everything. We're going deep with this article. Decentralization and the concepts behind decentralized systems. It's got some real mind-blowing stuff in there.
It's wild how this article connects the dots back in time.
Yeah.
You start to see decentralization isn't new at all.
Yeah.
It's been a part of political and social thought for centuries.
It's true. I mean, Locke and Rousseau, those guys are dealing with the same questions about power and freedom way back when.
Exactly. Think of it like a kingdom versus a democracy. That's the core tension of decentralization. Who has the power?
I see. So the article also links this to libertarianism, especially when it comes to Bitcoin. I got to admit, that got me thinking.
Yeah, many early Bitcoin folks were into less government, more individual control. But honestly, decentralization goes way beyond just one political view.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
Well, there's this economist, Friedrich Hayek. Back in the 70s, he had this radical idea competing currencies. Now, fast forward to Bitcoin, it's like a real-world version of that vision decades later.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you wonder, huh?
That's a crazy connection. Okay, so one thing that blew my mind in this article was trustless systems. Usually we trust banks, governments, the big guys, but decentralization flips that on its head.
Totally. Instead of institutions, it's about using math, cryptography, basically code, to make systems trustworthy on their own.
So we're trusting algorithms, not people.
Exactly. Imagine buying a house, right? Normally, lawyers, banks, everyone's involved. But blockchain, the tech behind Bitcoin, it could cut out those middlemen, making things more secure.
That's huge. Okay, we've talked trust, but there's also autonomy that really stood out in the article.
Absolutely. Autonomy is about making your own choices, controlling your money, data, your online self. That's powerful stuff.
Like taking back control of your digital life, right? But is that even possible in our world today? It's got me wondering.
Big questions, for sure. But before we get too deep into that, let's look at the other side. Because the article's honest about the downsides of decentralization, too. And those are just as important to think about.
It's like we're talking about two completely different universes, centralization versus decentralization, and we got to pick a side.
Not necessarily. It's more like a spectrum. Extreme centralization on one end, total decentralization on the other. In reality, most things fall somewhere in between.
That makes sense. I mean, even the internet, which feels decentralized, still has these huge companies calling some of the shots.
Exactly. And that highlights what's so interesting about it. That decentralized design makes it resilient. No single point of failure, right? But that same lack of central control, it brings challenges, like we see with misinformation and all that. Double-edged sword, for sure.
Right. So it's about accepting some level of, messiness, unpredictability.
Yeah, totally. And that goes back to this idea of anti-fragility the article mentions. Heard of that?
Not really, no.
So it means instead of just resisting shocks, the system gets stronger because of them. Imagine a rigid hierarchy, like a house of cards. One card pulled, the whole thing crumbles. Decentralized network, more like the internet. One part down, the rest reroutes, keeps going.
Okay, I see. So instead of aiming for perfect, which is impossible, we should want systems that can adapt, evolve, even benefit from challenges.
Exactly. And that leads us to another cool thing about decentralization. Self-organization. It's not top-down control. It's about the rules of the game and letting the system figure it out.
Kind of like, a colony of ants, each one doing its thing, no ant CEO calling the shots. It just works.
Perfect analogy. And it connects to some classic econ stuff. Remember Adam Smith's invisible hand guiding the market? Same idea, individuals acting in their own interest, but somehow order emerges.
Right. But isn't there a risk of chaos without someone at the top? The article mentioned criticisms of this whole thing, right?
Oh, absolutely. One big one, accountability. If no one's in charge, who are you going to blame when things go wrong?
That's a good point. It's like, where do you even start?
Tough question. And it's not just blame. It's decision-making, too. Centralized, you got a clear chain of command. Decentralized. Reaching consensus, it's messy, slow, like herding cats sometimes.
Like those Bitcoin debates the article talked about. Different visions, forks in the blockchain, almost like too much democracy can backfire.
It's a balance, that's for sure. And the article brings up another criticism, new power structures popping up, even in systems meant to be decentralized.
So even with the best intentions, we end up back where we started. Power in the hands of a few.
It's a real danger. The article used Bitcoin mining as an example. Anyone can be a miner, in theory. But in reality, you need serious computing power, resources, money. So you get these big mining pools controlling a big chunk of the network.
So even when we try to distribute power, we're still running into these age-old problems of like power dynamics can't escape human nature, huh?
It's true, and that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating. It's not just tech. It's philosophy, sociology, it's psychology, understanding ourselves and how we interact.
It's about the kind of future we're building and who gets to build it.
Exactly. And that's something we'll explore even further in the final part of our deep dive.
So we've been through a lot, huh? Ancient philosophers, Bitcoin, trustless systems. My head's spinning a little.
It's a wild ride for
Yeah.
sure. But that's what happens when you start tugging on these big ideas. They unravel a lot more than you expect.
Totally. And for me, the big takeaway is that this whole decentralization thing, it's not just some tech dream,
Yeah.
It's about how we live, how we govern ourselves, even how we think about something as basic as trust.
Couldn't agree more. The article really nailed it. It's not about picking sides pro or anti-decentralization. It's about understanding the nuances, the good and the bad, the whole picture.
It's about making smart choices about the future, right? Like,
Wow.
do we stick with centralized power, or do we try these other ways of organizing ourselves?
And that's where it gets really interesting, because the article argues that this isn't just some theory. Decentralization is already unfolding all around us.
Really? Like what? Give me examples.
Well, we talked about the internet, but think about open source software where anyone can jump in on the code. Or those peer-to-peer networks, sharing files directly, no central server. Even things like, ride sharing, Airbnb, that whole sharing economy. It's decentralizing stuff that used to be totally different.
So it's like these little cracks are appearing in the way things have always been, and something new is pushing through.
Exactly. And the more we get it, the better we'll be at navigating this whole changing world. It's like this deep dive gave us a new lens to look through.
I like that. It wasn't just learning new facts. It was like changing how we see things.
That's the beauty of these big ideas. They mess with our assumptions, make us see things differently, and honestly leave us with more questions than answers, which is a good thing.
Totally. Because the answers are never easy, right? But that's what makes it all so interesting, that constant search for knowledge, for understanding. For anyone listening who wants to go even deeper down the rabbit hole with us, you can find a link to the article in our show notes.
And as always, we want to know what you think, what really hit home for you, what surprised you.
Yeah.
How does this all connect to your own life, your work, your corner of the world?
It all comes back to us, right? How we, each of us, choose to help shape the future. So keep questioning, keep exploring, keep those deep dives going. Until next time, everybody.